The gaslights of London flicker like distant stars on a foggy evening, casting long shadows across cobblestone streets slick with rain. Carriages clatter past, their wheels splashing through puddles, while the distant cry of a newsboy echoes down the alleyways. Another ordinary night in 1895. Or so it seems. But beneath the surface of this familiar world, something far stranger stirs. A secret is about to unravel, one locked away by a missing key, a key that should never have vanished, and yet somehow, impossibly, has. This isn't just any lost trinket. This key opens doors best left closed, and now it's fallen into the wrong hands, or perhaps no hands at all. Enter Sherlock Holmes, the world's greatest detective, his sharp mind already turning over the puzzle. A client arrives at 221B Baker Street with a story too bizarre to dismiss. A key, passed down through generations, suddenly gone from a locked drawer. No forced entry, no signs of theft, just emptiness where iron and brass should be. But here's the unsettling truth. This key isn't merely valuable, it's dangerous. Whispers speak of its connection to a long-buried scandal, one that could topple fortunes and rewrite history. And now, with its disappearance, the shadows of London seem to breathe with new purpose, as if the city itself is waiting for the next move in a game no one fully understands. What follows is a maze of cryptic clues, each more baffling than the last. A single feather left at the scene, a pocket watch stopped at the precise moment the key vanished, and a name whispered in the dark Albion, a word that sends a chill down even Holmes' spine. The stakes, higher than you might imagine, because this isn't just about finding a lost object. It's about uncovering a truth someone would kill to keep hidden. So lean in, dear viewer, and prepare to step into the heart of Victorian intrigue. By the time this tale ends, you'll question every locked door, every whispered secret, and whether some keys were never meant to be found. The game, as Holmes would say, is afoot. The door of 221B Baker Street creaks open to reveal a man whose polished exterior barely conceals the tremor in his hands. Lord Alfred Winthrop, third son of the Earl of Blackheath, stands before Holmes and Watson like a man walking the edge of a knife. His gloves kid leather, immaculately tailored twist between his fingers as he speaks. It's absurd, I know, he begins, voice cracking under the weight of embarrassment and dread. A missing key shouldn't unmake a man, but this won't. He trails off, glancing over his shoulder as if the very walls might be listening. The story pours out in halting confession. The Winthrop family's iron-strong vault, hidden behind a false bookcase in their ancestral library, hasn't been opened in decades. No one remembers what lies inside, only that every generation is sworn to protect its contents. The key, passed from father to eldest son in a private midnight ritual, resides in a velvet-lined drawer in Lord Winthrop's study. Or rather it did, until 3 nights ago when the drawer was found unlocked. Empty, no scratches, no signs of tampering, just the lingering scent of bergamot, a cologne none in the household wear. Holmes' fingers steeple beneath his chin, his gaze sharpening like a blade. "You've told no one of this," he interjects. Winthrop pales. Not even the police. If word got out that the Winthrop vault could be breached, the unspoken truth hangs heavy. London's aristocracy thrives on secrets, and one family's vulnerability could topple a dozen carefully balanced fortunes. Watson observes the way Holmes' eyes flicker, not with pity, but with the thrill of the hunt. Because here's what makes this case irresistible: the sheer impossibility of it. A key guarded like a crown jewel, vanished from a locked drawer inside a locked room in a house bristling with servants. No duplicates exist. no plausible suspects emerge. Just a feather, a single black raven's feather, left curled on the windowsill, and that haunting word scrawled in dust on the desk, Albion. For Holmes, this isn't merely theft. It's theatre, a challenge woven from whispers and shadows, demanding an audience with the only mind in London capable of unraveling it. The game, as they say, is most certainly afoot. The Winthrop key is no ordinary piece of metal. Crafted in 1789 by a master locksmith whose name has been deliberately erased from history. Its intricate design defies replication, a twisting helix of brass and iron, crowned with a lion's head so finely detailed, each whisker seems to quiver in the light. But its true value lies not in craftsmanship, but in what it guards. For over a century, the Winthrops have treated this key with the reverence of a holy relic, passing it down under cover of darkness from father to heir alongside a warning. Some doors, once opened, cannot be shut again. Legend claims the vault it accesses was built during the chaos of the French Revolution, when fleeing aristocrats smuggled more than gold out of Paris. Documents, letters, proof of alliances that could rewrite the political landscape of Europe. The Winthrops, then rising in influence, became reluctant custodians of these secrets, not out of virtue, but necessity. One does not refuse a king's request, even an exiled one. And so the vault was sealed, its contents known only to a dying monarch and the Winthrop patriarch, who swore an oath on his family's honor. Yet honor, as Holmes would later note, makes poor armor against greed. By 1832, whispers of the vault's contents had birthed a macabre family ritual. Each heir, upon receiving the key, was required to spend a solitary night in the library, with only a candle and the vault's imposing door for company. None ever turned the lock. Some claimed it was out of respect for the oath. Others, in hushed tones, spoke of faint screams echoing from behind the iron. A trick of the wind, surely, though no window stood nearby. Superstition clung to the key like cobwebs. Servants avoided the study where it was kept, crossing themselves if tasked with dusting nearby. It was said the lion's eyes followed those unworthy of its secrets, and more than one housemaid resigned after insisting the key had blinked at her. Even the velvet-lined drawer bore strange markings, tiny, precise notches along its edge, as if someone had once tried to pick the lock from the inside. Now, with the key vanished, these old fears surge anew, because the Winthrop vault was never just a strongbox. It was a promise, a threat, a Pandora's box dressed in Victorian restraint. And as Holmes traces his finger along the empty drawer's peculiar notches, one chilling possibility emerges. Perhaps the key didn't vanish. Perhaps it was summoned. Dr. Watson's pen hovers over his notebook, ink pooling slightly as he struggles to keep pace with Holmes' rapid-fire interrogation. To the untrained eye, his friend's questions might seem scattered. Obsessing over the key's exact weight, 3.2 ounces, as Lord Winthrop reluctantly recalls, the peculiar tarnish along its teeth, even the depth of the mud clinging to the aristocrat's otherwise impeccable boots. But Watson has learned to see the pattern in Holmes' madness. Each seemingly trivial detail is a thread, and Holmes is weaving them into a net meant to catch the truth. The doctor's notes capture the scene with a clinician's precision. Holmes circles the client like a hawk, his gaze lingering on the man's left boot, the one with a fresh scrape near the heel. "You walked through Whitechapel before coming here." Holmes remarks, not a question but a statement. Winthrop stiffens. Irrelevant, he insists. But Holmes' fingers twitch, the way they do when he's uncovered a lie disguised as diversion. Watson himself had missed the significance of the boots, until Holmes pointed it out. The mud wasn't the rich brown of Mayfair's well-tended lanes. but the sooty sludge of London's East End, a place no aristocrat would venture without cause. And that scrape fresh, as if the boot had caught on something jagged, a loose cobble, or perhaps the edge of a cellar grating, then there's the key itself. While Winthrop frets over its sentimental value, Holmes fixates on its physicality. Brass doesn't tarnish in that pattern naturally, he mutters, holding an imaginary key up to the gaslight's glow. Unless it's been exposed to something acidic, vinegar perhaps, or human sweat over decades of handling. Watson watches as the detective's eyes narrow, a telltale sign he's just connected two seemingly unrelated facts. The true marvel, Watson realizes, isn't Holmes' ability to notice these details. It's how he weighs them. The mud suggests a detour. The tarnish hints at frequent use by someone other than the Winthrops. Even the key's weight, lighter than expected for its size, implies hollow spaces within, perhaps compartments. Every observation is a puzzle piece, and Holmes is assembling them in his mind at a speed that leaves ordinary men dizzy. Watson's notes trail off as Holmes suddenly stills, his entire body taut with revelation. That's when the doctor knows the game has shifted. Somewhere in this labyrinth of oddities, Sherlock Holmes has found his first true thread, and he's about to pull. Holmes' fingers trace the edge of the empty drawer with the precision of a concert pianist, pausing at a nearly imperceptible groove along the bottom. With a sudden intake of breath, he drops to one knee, his magnifying glass catching the faintest glimmer of paper tucked beneath the velvet lining. Not torn, not crumpled place. A single sheet, folded so precisely its edges align like a geometric puzzle. And on it, a string of symbols that would baffle most men, but not Sherlock Holmes. His lips curl into something between a smirk and a snarl as he holds the paper to the light. "Ah," he murmurs, "our thief has a flair for drama, and a distinct lack of originality." The cipher is Child's, play to Holmes a variation of the Caesar shift, where each letter marches backward 3 places in the alphabet, but the paper itself tells a far richer story. Watson leans in as Holmes rubs a gloved thumb across the surface. "Laid paper," Holmes announces, "handmade, with the watermark of James Watman's mill, discontinued in 1874. Our burglar pilfered this from an antiquarian's collection, or worse, a museum." The ink offers even more damning evidence. Holmes wets the tip of his finger, dabs it lightly against one symbol, and sniffs. "Iron gall," he declares, "mixed with gum arabic and something floral, bergamot perhaps." His eyes flick to Winthrop, who pales at the echo of his own earlier description. But it's the pressure of the pen strokes that seals the deduction. Holmes tilts the page toward the gaslight, revealing grooves so deep they shadow each character. "Left-handed," he mutters, and agitated see how the downstrokes tremble. Either our culprit was in a violent hurry, or... His voice trails off as he plucks a single black fiber from the paper's edge. Watson squints. Cat hair. Holmes shakes his head. Raven, identical to the feather left on the windowsill. The room falls silent as the implications settle. This isn't theft, it's taunting. Every detail, from the archaic paper to the citrus-scented ink, is a deliberate breadcrumb. And as Holmes' gaze drifts to the bookshelf behind Winthrop, where a single volume sits slightly askew, the game shifts again. Whoever took the key didn't just leave a note, they left an invitation. The Winthrop Manor looms against the storm-washed sky, its Gothic spires clawing at the clouds like skeletal fingers. Holmes barely waits for the carriage to halt before springing onto the gravel drive, his keen eyes already cataloguing the estate's vulnerabilities. The overgrown ivy near the library windows, the groomsman's misplaced ladder leaning against the east wall. Watson follows, his medical bag thumping against his side, though he knows it's not bandages they'll need today, but wits sharper than the wind cutting through the courtyard. Inside, the library is a mausoleum of privilege, its air thick with the scent of aged leather and beeswax. The broken display case draws them like a magnet. Glass shards litter the Persian rug, catching the weak afternoon light, but Holmes dismisses them with a flick of his wrist. Too neat, he mutters, shattered outward from within. Watson frowns. No thief would break a case from the inside unless they'd already been trapped inside the room. Holmes drops to his knees, his nose inches from the floorboards. The dust tells a story only he can read. 2 sets of footprints, he announces, 1 boot polished, likely Winthrop's, and something softer, slippers perhaps. His gloved finger traces a faint scuff near the display's base. But notice no approach. The second set begins here, as if the wearer materialized beside the case. Watson resists the urge to glance over his shoulder. The detective's attention shifts to the window latch unblemished, yet ever so slightly ajar. No pry marks, Holmes murmurs. Our burglar didn't force entry. They were invited. His gaze slides toward the butler hovering in the doorway, the man's starched collar suddenly seeming less like uniform and more like armor. Then the oddest detail of all, the undisturbed layer of dust atop the adjacent bookshelf, save for 3 parallel lines like claws had dragged through the grime. Watson's pulse quickens as Holmes produces a vial from his pocket, collecting not fingerprints, but feather fragments, black as midnight, identical to the raven's plume left at Baker Street. The pieces don't fit, the locked room, the impossible footprints, the absence of struggle where there should have been chaos, unless Holmes' fingers still as they brush against the display case's velvet interior. There, nearly invisible, a single strand of silver wire, thin as a spider's silk, coiled like a serpent ready to strike. The trap wasn't meant to keep thieves out. It was designed to let something in. The library door creaks open just enough to reveal a sliver of a starched, white apron, before snapping shut again. Holmes doesn't look up from the silver wire coiled in his palm, but his voice cuts through the silence like a scalpel. Ah, the missing witness. A gasp from the hallway, then shuffling someone leaning too heavily against the doorframe. When the maid finally steps inside, her fingers twist the apron strings into knots so tight they could strangle a man. Mary Cooper, is it? Holmes' tone is deceptively light, though his eyes never leave her wrists. The left one sports a fresh scratch, angry and red beneath her cuff. Watson recognizes the pattern instantly. 4 parallel lines, uneven but deliberate. Not from a bramble or a careless stumble. From claws. The maid's alibi unravels faster than her fraying nerves. She claims to have been polishing silver in the pantry when the key vanished, yet the pungent scent of lavender oil still clings to her sleeves, a cleaning agent used exclusively for the library's oak paneling. Curious, Holmes muses, plucking a single black feather from her apron pocket with a magician's flourish. Ravens don't often preen in the scullery. Watson watches the color drain from her face as Holmes circles her, like a mathematician solving for X. Every detail becomes damning. The way her right shoe sole carries traces of the library's distinctive green wax, used only on the 2nd floor, the faint smudge of bergamot on her collar matching the scent in the study. Even the way she keeps glancing at the grandfather clock, not to check the time, but as if waiting for it to chime some unholy hour. Then Holmes does something unexpected. He leans in close enough to whisper, and what he says makes Mary Cooper's knees buckle. Watson never catches the words, but he sees their effect. Her hands fly to her throat, not in fear, but to clutch at a pendant hidden beneath her dress. A pendant shaped like a lion's head, its eyes hollow where gemstones once sat. The game, it seems, has a third player, and she's been holding her cards far too close. Holmes' fingertips brush against the cracked leather binding of the diary. Its spine stiff with age, and something more deliberate dried, glue sealing the pages shut like a tomb. The late Lord Winthrop's secrets are trapped between these covers, and the detective's nostrils flare at the faint, acrid trace of rabbit skin adhesive, a telltale sign of hurried concealment. "Watson," he murmurs, "fetch the kettle." Steam curls from the spout as Holmes holds the diary's edges precisely above the heat, his movements surgical. Too close and the ink will bleed, too far and the glue won't yield. Watson watches, transfixed, as the first page begins to lift not with a crack, but a sigh, as if the book itself is exhaling a century's worth of withheld breath. The revealed entries are a mosaic of paranoia and revelation. Lord Winthrop's handwriting grows increasingly erratic, the letters slanting as if shoved by a trembling hand. The key is not a tool, one passage insists, but a ward. Its teeth do not turn a lock, they silence one. Holmes' pulse quickens. The Winthrop vault, it seems, was never meant to store treasures. It was designed to imprison something. Fragments of a forgotten ritual emerge, instructions for binding the gate every 33 years, warnings about the eclipsed days when the vault's occupant grows restless. Then the most damning line of all, scrawled in margins like a confession. Albion walks when the raven sings. Watson recoils as Holmes abruptly snaps the diary shut. The steam has done its work, but the truth it's unearthed is far colder. That delicate silver wire from the display case wasn't a theft deterrent. It was a tripwire. And somewhere in London, a door without a key is beginning to stir. The decoded message glows like venom in the lamplight, its letters stark against the aged paper. Holmes lays it flat upon Winthrop's desk, his fingertip tapping the final sequence. Midnight, Blackwall Dock, the lion greets the lamb. Watson leans in, half expecting the words to rearrange themselves. "A meeting place," he murmurs. Holmes' response is razor-edged. "No, Doctor, a feeding ground." The cipher itself is a relic, plucked from the annals of the Hellfire Club's most decadent era. Holmes traces the shifted alphabet with clinical detachment. Each letter retreats 3 places child's play to crack, but the arrogance is in the presentation. This was never meant to conceal. It was meant to impress. The paper crackles as he flips it, revealing a nearly invisible crest pressed into the corner, a lion swallowing its own tail. The mark of the Ordo Leonis, a splinter group expelled from the Hellfire Club in 1790, for practices even their debauched brethren found excessive. Watson's medical bag slides from his shoulder as the implications strike. The Ordo Leonis weren't mere libertines. Their so-called rituals revolved around a singular obsession, unlocking what they called the doors between worlds. Holmes' voice drops, threading through the library's stale air like smoke. They believed certain bloodlines, the Winthrops among them, were born with the talent to turn keys in locks that shouldn't exist. And this, he flicks the decoded note, is their idea of an invitation. Outside, the storm rattles the windows with renewed fury. Somewhere beneath the thunder, the distant cry of a raven carries from the docks. Time, it seems, is not just ticking. It's laughing. Blackwall Dock swallows the midnight hour whole, its wooden planks slick with brine and something darker, oil, perhaps, or blood too old to name. The Thames hisses against the pilings like a restless sleeper, its currents tugging at the shadows that coil between moored ships. Holmes stands motionless in the lee of a crumbling warehouse, his profile sharp enough to cut the fog. Watson, pressed beside him, feels the weight of his service revolver through his coat pocket, though both men know bullets may prove useless against what walks tonight. A figure emerges from the mist, not creeping, not skulking, but striding with the certainty of a man who believes himself unseen. The moonlight catches the silver tip of a walking stick before revealing the rest. A greatcoat tailored for a nobleman, its hem crusted with dockyard filth. The face remains obscured by a hat pulled low. But Watson doesn't need to see it to recognize the arrogance in that stride. This is no hired thief. This is someone who expects the world to kneel. The package exchanged is laughably small, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with twine. The shadowy recipient reaches for it eagerly, their fingers too long, too thin, almost skeletal in the wavering gaslight. Just as the transfer completes, a gust parts the fog and Watson's breath catches. The recipient's sleeve has slipped back, revealing a wrist tattooed with that same lion swallowing, its tail symbol from the diary. Then the gunshot, sudden, deafening, not aimed at them, but at the package itself, which explodes in a shower of splinters and shredded cloth. The aristocratic figure doesn't flinch. He simply turns toward the shooter, a silhouette perched on the rigging of a nearby schooner, and raises his walking stick like a conductor's baton. The response is instantaneous. The Raven Watson had dismissed as a dockside scavenger dives from the mast, its wings slicing the air with a sound like tearing parchment. It strikes the shooter square in the throat, and the man plummets into the Thames without a cry. In the stunned silence that follows, the aristocrat adjusts his cuffs, steps over the fallen packaged remains, and vanishes into the fog as calmly as one retiring after a mediocre opera. What's left behind isn't the key, but something far more unsettling. A single playing card, the Queen of Hearts, her painted eyes gouged out, and written beneath in that same citrus-scented ink, "Next time, bring the real one." Holmes' hand clamps onto Watson's forearm, not in warning, but in shared realization. This was never an exchange. It was an audition, and London's greatest detective has just failed his first test. The cobblestones glisten with rain as Holmes bends to examine a smudge of grey ash near a leaking gutter pipe. "Ladakia," he mutters, rubbing the residue between his fingers. Imported, our aristocrat has expensive tastes and a 2-minute lead. Watson barely registers the comment before Holmes is off, sprinting down the alley with his coat flaring like a bat's wings. The trail seems impossible, just wisps of smoke and the occasional scuff mark. But Holmes moves with eerie certainty, his cane tapping rhythmically against brickwork, as if counting footsteps only he can hear. Then a stumble. A single glove lies discarded near a fishmonger's shuttered stall, its kid leather still damp from the fugitive's sweating palm. Watson reaches for it, but Holmes kicks it aside with sudden violence. "Don't!" The warning comes a heartbeat too late. The glove's lining glints with needles, not steel, but slivers of blackthorn, their tips sticky with something that smells faintly of almonds. Our friend doesn't just run. Holmes hisses, he baits. The chase turns treacherous. Alleyways narrow into rut, runs where the gaslights dare not reach. Watson's boot catches on a tripwire strung knee-high between barrels, sending him sprawling into a mound of rotten cabbage. His revolver skitters across the stones, swallowed by the dark. Holmes doesn't pause. Ahead, the rhythmic slap of footsteps echoes off wet brick, then splits into two distinct paths. Left toward the river, right into the labyrinth of 7 dials. Holmes freezes, his head cocked like a hound catching a scent. Somewhere above, a raven caws 3 times. His eyes dart to a third option Watson hadn't even noticed. A rusted sewer grate, slightly ajar, with fresh scratches gleaming silver against the iron. The aristocrat didn't choose left or right. He vanished downward. Watson's heart pounds as he watches his friend hesitate, not from doubt, but from something far more unsettling. For the first time in their partnership, Sherlock Holmes stands motionless at a crossroads, his hand hovering over the grate as if afraid to lift it. The message is clear. This isn't pursuit anymore, it's descent. The wounded man groans as Holmes rolls him onto his back, the cobblestones beneath him now smeared with something darker than rainwater. Blood seeps through his sleeve where the raven's talons struck, but it's the glint of his cufflinks that catches Holmes' eye platinum. Engraved with a crest too worn to identify, yet unmistakably regimental. "You'll live," Holmes remarks, though his tone suggests this might be temporary. But your employer's gratitude, that ship has sailed. The criminal's breath comes in ragged gulps, his military-trained posture crumbling under pain. Watson recognizes the signs: a soldier's grip on his own thigh, the way his jaw clenches to suppress a scream. This man didn't just serve, he was drilled. Holmes leans closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that carries more threat than a shout. Who pays a decorated man to play courier for stolen artifacts? The answer spills out between clenched teeth. A letter left in a Soho boarding house. Payment in sovereigns, not paper. Instructions delivered by a boy who smelled of embalming fluid. The details are meticulous, rehearsed right up until Holmes interrupts. "You're forgetting the raven," he says, plucking a single black feather from the man's lapel. The effect is instant. The thief's bravado cracks like thin ice, his pupils dilating in primal recognition. It wasn't just watching, he chokes out. It was listening. Watson stiffens. The man's terror isn't for the law or even his shadowy employer. It's for the creature that circled above the docks with uncanny precision, as if directed by some unseen hand. Holmes presses harder, your benefactor's name, a shake of the head, their face, another refusal, but the man's fingers twitch toward his pocket, not in defiance, but habit. Holmes doesn't wait for permission. A folded square of vellum emerges, its edges frayed from constant handling. The handwriting is elegant, slanting, and utterly damning. The lion wakes at moonfall. Fail me and you'll serve as his first meal. Watson expects Holmes to pocket the note as evidence. Instead, he holds it to the thief's nose. Bergamot. Same as the ink in Winthrop's study. The connection ignites like gunpowder. This isn't just a hired hand, he's a message himself. A living, bleeding warning to anyone who might cross the aristocrat in the greatcoat. And as Holmes rises, leaving the man to his fate, one truth becomes inescapable. The real thief isn't the one bleeding on the docks. He's the one who commanded the raven. The brass key clatters onto the laboratory table, its impact sending ripples through the shallow dish of distilled water Holmes keeps for testing residues. At first glance, it's a perfect twin to the Winthrop heirloom, same lion's head pommel, same helical twists along the shaft. But Holmes doesn't trust glances. His magnifying glass hovers over the artifact like a hawk, catching the microscopic betrayals in the metal. "Observe, Watson," he murmurs, tilting the glass to highlight a faint seam near the base. Our forger replicated the design flawlessly, but forgot 18th century casting techniques left tiny air pockets in the brass. Watson leans in, spotting the difference instantly. The original key, according to Winthrop's descriptions, would bear the organic imperfections of hand-poured molten metal bubbles, trapped like frozen breath. This duplicate is too smooth, its surface unnaturally even. Modern electrotyping, Holmes confirms, tapping the key's teeth. A chemical bath deposits layers of metal onto a wax mold. Quick, precise, and utterly soulless. But the real revelation comes when Holmes submerges both ends in separate vials of nitric acid. The genuine key, or what remains of it in Holmes' notes, would tarnish a particular shade of green due to its unique alloy. The imposter it froths violently, releasing a whiff of sulfur that makes Watson recoil. Plated iron, Holmes announces, a cheap trick meant to fool the eye, not the scales. He weighs them in each palm, his smirk sharpening. The original is 3.2 ounces, this, nearly 5, our thief traded weight for speed. Then Holmes does something peculiar. He places the fake key against a tuning fork, striking it sharply. The note that rings out is flat, dull. Cast iron vibrates differently than brass, he muses. Which means his fingers dart to the key's hollow lion head, probing until a hidden compartment springs open with a click. Inside rests a single slip of rice paper, its message burned at the edges as if retrieved from fire. You hold the decoy. The true key turns at the witching hour. Watson expects frustration from his friend. Instead, Holmes exhales something perilously close to admiration. A double blind, he whispers. The first key was stolen to be found, this one planted to be studied. His magnifying glass catches the lamplight as he rotates it over the note's watermark. A three-tailed lion, identical to the tattoo on the dockside assassin's wrist. The game hasn't just escalated, it's split in two. The lion's head key gleams dully in the lamplight as Holmes pivots it between his fingers. His voice dropping into that low, relentless rhythm Watson knows means the pieces have clicked. Consider the diary's panic, the cipher's arrogance, and now this. He flicks the duplicate key with his thumbnail, producing a hollow tink. A pantomime of theft designed to misdirect. But from what? His free hand spreads the decoded note beside Winthrop's diary, their ink-stained edges overlapping like a ghastly puzzle. The uncle. Watson frowns. Lord Edwin, but he's been dead these 20 years. Precisely. Holmes' finger stabs at a diary entry dated 3 days before Edwin's alleged hunting accident. He insists the vault's contents belong to Albion now. God help us if he's right. The word Albion is underlined so violently the quill tore the page. Our client's dear uncle didn't die by misadventure, Watson. He was silenced for what he discovered in that vault. The deduction unfurls with surgical precision. Edwin, the spare heir with a scholar's mind, had likely studied the family's darkest heirloom closer than any before him. Too close, Holmes snatches up the fake key, tilting it to reveal the nearly invisible seam. This isn't just a replica, it's a map. Notice the helix twists, not random, but scaled-down versions of the actual vault lock's mechanism. Someone reconstructed it from descriptions or memory. His eyes gleam. Edwin wouldn't have needed to pick the lock. As family, he could examine the key at will. Perhaps even sketch it. The horror blooms like ink in water. The uncle hadn't just stumbled onto a scandal, he'd documented it. And now, decades later, his notes had resurfaced, guiding thieves to the one secret worth killing for. Proof that the Winthrop fortune was never legitimately earned, but extorted from exiled French aristocracy during the Revolution. Blackmail dressed up as noble sacrifice. Holmes' voice turns razor thin. That vault doesn't hold treasures or occult horrors. It contains ledgers, named. Every pound the Winthrops, squeezed from desperate nobles fleeing the guillotine. He flips the diary to its final entry, where the late lord's handwriting disintegrates into near illegible panic. Edwin's right, the key doesn't lock the vault, it locks our throats. The raven's cry echoes through the room, though no window stands open. Some secrets, it seems, refuse to stay buried. The study doors explode inward with a force that sends papers fluttering like startled birds, their edges catching the firelight as they drift toward the Persian rug. Lord Edwin Winthrop doesn't startle. He merely lifts his head from the ledger spread before him, his spectacles reflecting the flames in twin bursts of orange. The resemblance to his nephew is uncanny, though time has whittled his features sharper, harder, like a blade honed by secrets. Holmes doesn't bother with greetings. He slams the forged key onto the desk, its hollow clatter punctuated by the hiss of settling embers. "A neat trick," he says, voice colder than the draft, snaking through the window cracks. "But you forgot one detail. Colonial contracts from 1793 used iron gall ink. Yours." He flicks open the ledger to a page marred by fresh, blue-black script. Modern aniline, a chemist's oversight. Edwin's fingers twitch toward a decanter of brandy, though his posture remains relaxed, almost amused. "You accuse me of forging my own family's records." His chuckle rasps like a saw through bone, preposterous. Not forging, revealing. Holmes pivots to the bookshelf, yanking down a volume bound in suspiciously new leather. Inside, sandwiched between pages, lies a brittle sheet of vellum, a shipping manifest for the HMS Albion, dated 1794. Its cargo list is damning. Not spices or silks, but human souls numbered like livestock. The Winthrop vault doesn't hold French royal secrets. Holmes continues. "It conceals proof your fortune was built on slave ships, rebranded as merchant vessels after the trade ban." Watson's stomach knots as Edwin's facade finally cracks. Not with guilt, but relief. 20 years I've waited," the old man murmurs, stroking the manifest like a lover's cheek. "My brother had me shot off my horse for uncovering this. But ledgers don't bleed, Holmes, they remember." Outside, thunder groans as if the sky itself recoils. The raven perched on the windowsill cocks its head, black eyes glinting with something too knowing to be mere instinct. Edwin smiles. The key was never lost. It was awakened, and now he nods to the ledger. Albion walks. The Winthrop vault door groans open with the reluctance of a guilty conscience, revealing not gold or jewels, but stacks of ledgers bound in cracked leather, their spines marked with names that still carry weight in London's highest circles. Watson's breath catches at the sight not from dust, but from the sheer moral weight pressing down on the cramped space. The first page he lifts details shipments disguised as textiles, their true cargo inked beneath in cipher. 20 head, prime condition, to be boarded at moonless tide. His hands tremble. These aren't just records. They're confessions. Holmes, by contrast, moves through the documents with the precision of a surgeon, his fingers tracing columns of numbers that tell a story far darker than French royal scandals. "Note the dates," he murmurs, holding a page to the flickering lantern light. 1807, a full year after the Slave Trade Act. The Winthrops weren't just profiting from slavery. They banked on Britain looking the other way. His tone holds no outrage, only the cold satisfaction of a puzzle solved. To him, this is arithmetic. Crimes quantified in pounds sterling and human lives. Watson's revulsion rolls off him in waves. These aren't ledgers, Holmes, they're balance sheets. Holmes interrupts, tapping an entry where losses at sea are deducted like spoiled grain. Every transaction recorded with the same care as their vineyards or coal mines. That's what chills you, Doctor, not the cruelty, but the banality of it. He's right, the meticulous handwriting, the careful tallies. It's the ordinary evil that curdles Watson's stomach. A rustle in the shadows makes them both turn. Tucked behind a crate of opium pipes, another lucrative sideline. A smaller journal lies open to a child's shaky script. Papa says the bad air makes the workers sleep, but I saw men thrown overboard. Watson's knees nearly buckle. This isn't history. It's a family's rot, preserved like a specimen in glass. Holmes, ever the diagnostician, isolates the linchpin. A letter from the Archbishop of Canterbury himself, thanking Lord Winthrop for his discretion regarding certain colonial investments. The church's seal mocks them from the parchment. Now we understand Edwin's fixation. Holmes says softly, "This vault doesn't just damn the Winthrops. It implicates an empire. Watson wants to burn it all. Holmes sees only evidence, and the raven watching from the vault's threshold. It sees an opportunity." The game was never about theft. It was about who gets to rewrite history. The brandy swirls violently in its glass as Edwin's hand trembles not from age, but the weight of decades spent binding his conscience with ledger lines and legal fiction. Guilt, his laugh is a dry rasp, like parchment crumbling to ash. No, Mr. Holmes, shame, the kind that festers when you realize your bloodline's gilded hands are stained with something no amount of soap can scrub away. He leans forward, firelight carving hollows beneath his eyes where sleep should reside. I could have burned those ledgers 20 years ago, but truth doesn't vanish in flame. It just scatters on the wind, waiting to choke someone else. Watson's grip tightens around his own untouched drink. The confession unfurls like a noose. Edwin hadn't just discovered the family's profiteering from banned slave runs. He'd traced the money through generations, how every Winthrop diamond, every acre of inherited land, pulsed with the heartbeat of stolen lives. My brother's solution was elegant. Edwin mutters, tapping the forged key on the desk. Bury the evidence so deep even God would need a map. But prisons of paper have weak locks, Holmes, especially when the jailer starts hearing whispers. Here the tale turns. Edwin's voice drops, his gaze darting to the raven now perched on the mantel. The creature's presence isn't coincidence, it's punctuation. The night before my accident, I dreamt of hands pushing through the vault door, not grasping, giving. His finger traces a ledger entry for 300 souls, lost in transit, the ink blurred by what might be water or something saltier. I realized then the vault wasn't protecting our fortune. It was silencing the debt. Holmes, ever the anatomist of motive, slices to the marrow. So you engineered a theft. Let the world think the Winthrop ghost walked again, rather than admit you needed absolution. Edwin's nod is barely perceptible. He'd spent years seeding clues, diary entries left where servants might gossip. The original key's specifications, borrowed by a fake antiquarian. Even the raven, it seems, was no wild predator, but a trained accomplice with a taste for bergamot-laced treats. A man can't repent for crimes history forgot, Edwin whispers. But if the truth claws its way out, that, Mr. Holmes, is justice even a Winthrop can't buy. Outside, thunder growls like a hungry beast. The ledger pages stir, their columns of names and numbers suddenly more than ink their epitaphs. And as the first drop of rain strikes the window, Watson realizes with icy clarity, this was never about finding a key. It was about turning the lock before the ghosts did it themselves. Mary Cooper's hands no longer tremble. They hang limp at her sides, the fight drained from her like ale from a cracked barrel. The pendant around her neck feels heavier now, its lion's head hollow-eyed under Holmes' scrutiny. They took my brother, she whispers, the words fraying at the edges. Docked his wages at the mill until he owed more than a year's pay. Said he'd swing for theft unless her throat works, but the rest strangles into silence. Holmes doesn't interrupt. He simply lifts the pendant, turning it to catch the lamplight on its broken clasp. This was your mother's, he deduces, not unkindly. The crest filed off to hide the family connection. Watson recognizes the signs. the two fine stitching on her cuffs, the way she pronounces drawing room with an aristocrat's inflection. Mary wasn't just a servant. She was gentry fallen on hard times, ripe for exploitation. The blackmail unfolds with brutal simplicity. Notes slipped into her apron pocket during Sunday service. Raven feathers left on her windowsill as reminders. The aristocrat always gloved, always shadowed, never raised his voice. He didn't need to. The mill owner's ledger, produced like a stage prop, showed her brother's forged debts in ink as red as fresh blood. Watson expects Holmes to condemn her complicity. Instead, he does something extraordinary. He removes his own glove, a gesture Watson's seen only once before, when comforting a client whose child had gone missing, and presses it into Mary's palm. "You'll take the morning coach to Edinburgh," he says, crisp as a band note. A Dr. Murray at the university requires a housekeeper. He asks no questions and pays in gold. The promise hangs between them, delicate as a spider's web. Protection, not punishment. Holmes' mercy isn't sentiment, it's strategy. Mary's brother still twists in the wind, and a desperate woman makes a formidable ally. As the maid's tears splash onto his glove, Holmes scribbles a name on his cuff and tucks it into her pocket. Inspector Lestrade. The game isn't over. It's simply changing players. Lord Winthrop's fingers dig into the armrests of his chair like a drowning man clutching driftwood, his knuckles bleaching white under the strain. The ledger lies open before him, its damning columns of numbers and names seeming to pulse under the lamplight. For a long moment, the only sound is the frantic tattoo of rain against the window panes. Then his breath escapes in a shuddering gasp, as if the weight of generations has finally crushed the air from his lungs. "All these years," he whispers, voice fraying at the edges, "I thought we were protectors of tradition, not profiteers of misery." Watson leans forward, his medical instincts overriding detective curiosity. He's seen shell-shocked soldiers wear this same hollowed expression. Men who'd glimpsed the abyss and found their reflections staring back. The sins of fathers aren't inherited, he offers gently, though the words taste like ash even as he speaks them. False comfort. They both know guilt needs no bloodline to metastasize. Holmes, ever the tactician, spins the ledger to examine its binding. "Sentiment won't unsink ships, Doctor," he mutters, tracing a water-stained page marked "Losses 30%, storm season." His tone carries no judgment, only calculation. These records are actionable. The statute of limitations won't protect you from civil suits. Lord Winthrop. Every family on these pages has descendants who'd gladly see your estate dismantled brick by brick. The aristocrat flinches as if struck. His gaze drifts to the vault's gaping maw, where centuries of complicity sprawl in ink and vellum. "What would you have me do?" The question isn't directed at either man, it's hurled at the ghosts crowding the room. Holmes' solution comes crisp and cold as a surgeon's scalpel. "Publish them." Watson's head snaps up. Even the raven on the mantel stills, its beady eyes fixed on the detective. Not as confession, Holmes continues, tapping the ledger with deliberate emphasis. As restitution. Trace the shipments. Calculate the modern equivalent of each human transaction. Establish a fund to compensate living descendants. His fingers flick a speck of dust from the page, a dismissal of centuries of exploitation in one precise gesture. "The courts will crucify you if they uncover this first. But voluntary reparations, that's not justice, Lord Winthrop, that's strategy." Watson watches the man's face cycle through grief, rage, and finally, cruelest of all, relief. Because Holmes hasn't offered absolution. He's offered a ledger of his own, a way to balance debts even the dead still owe. The key presses into Lord Winthrop's palm with the weight of far more than brass. Its lion's head staring up at him, as if daring him to turn it one final time. Holmes doesn't relinquish his grip immediately. His fingers linger just a moment too long, a silent challenge in the tension between them. "The lock is yours to open," he says, voice low beneath the rattle of rain against the windows. But the past, that belongs to the ledger's ghosts now. Watson braces for outrage. Instead, Winthrop's hand closes around the key with something like reverence, his thumb tracing the grooves where generations of fingers have worn the metal smooth. "This unlocked my family's fortune," he murmurs. "Do you truly expect me to melt it down as if it were common scrap?" Holmes' response is a blade wrapped in velvet. "I expect you to ask whether a fortune built on bones deserves preservation." He steps toward the vault, its iron door still ajar like a wound, and gestures to the stacks within. "Every page in there is a headstone, Winthrop. The question isn't whether to keep them, it's whether to bury them properly. The debate that follows isn't about morality. It's about memory." Winthrop argues for context, the ledgers as historical record, proof of how far society has come. Holmes counters with a street urchin's name scrawled in the margin of a shipping manifest. Boy approx. 12 hours fevered, jettisoned. "History isn't preserved in ink," he says softly. "It's carried in the silence between the lines." Watson, ever the bridge between ideals, offers a third path. The vault could be emptied, its contents donated to a museum specializing in colonial reckoning, not as trophies, but as testimony. "Let scholars trace the numbers," he urges. "Let visitors see the cost of their tea and sugar." Wind howls through the chimney, scattering ash across the hearth like uneasy spirits. Winthrop's resolve wavers, his gaze dropping to the key. For the first time, Watson notices how its teeth resemble a row of tiny, broken fangs. Then, a decision. Winthrop strides to the vault and wrenches a ledger free, its spine cracking like distant thunder. One page, then another, flutter into the fire, their edges curling as the ink bubbles into smoke. "Not all history deserves a monument," he says, watching the names dissolve. "Some of it deserves a pyre." The key, however, he pockets, not as a relic, as a reminder, and Holmes, though he says nothing, nods once. Because some doors, once opened, can never truly be shut again. The door crashes open with all the subtlety of a drunkard tumbling downstairs. And there stands Inspector Lestrade, his bowler hat askew, and his mustache twitching with indignation. Rain drips from his coat sleeves onto the Persian rug, forming tiny puddles that Holmes eyes with the disdain usually reserved for poorly disguised alibis. "Ah, the cavalry," Holmes drawls, not bothering to rise from his armchair. "How kind of you to join us now that the bullets have stopped flying and the blood's gone cold." Lestrade's face flushes the color of overripe plums as he splutters. "You can't just, that is to say, Scotland Yard has protocols, Holmes." His notebook flops open to a page suspiciously free of any ink beyond a doodle that might be a sheep or possibly a very confused cloud. Watson hides a smile behind his brandy glass, savoring the way Holmes' silence stretches just a beat too long, thick enough to choke on. When Holmes finally speaks, his voice could frost glass. "Let me reconstruct your morning, Inspector. You received my wire at 8:43. Stopped for kippers at your usual cafe. The grease stain on your tie suggests they were particularly undercooked today. Then dallied 20 minutes, debating whether to bring constables. As if this were a pantomime rather than a felony involving a peer of the realm." He flicks an invisible speck of dust from his sleeve. "By the time you mustered the courage to act, we'd already identified the forger, traced the blackmail, and prevented Lord Winthrop from immolating himself along with his family's darkest secret. Do keep up. Watson's cough doesn't quite disguise his chuckle, though Lestrade catches it anyway. The inspector's jowls quiver like unsettled custard. This isn't a laughing matter. There are procedures, evidence chains, paperwork. Ah yes, paperwork. Holmes produces Lestrade's own misplaced arrest warrant from between the pages of a scandalous French novel. Its official seal now somewhat compromised by what appears to be a marmalade thumbprint. Evidence suggests you're better suited to filing than fieldwork, Inspector. Perhaps stick to what you're good at. Lestrade's mouth opens and closes like a landed fish, but no sound emerges. Watson takes pity, though not much, and slides a brandy toward him. Drink up, old boy. The case may be over, but the headache is just beginning. The morning papers arrive at Baker Street like a flock of scandal-hungry crows, their ink still damp with lurid exaggerations. Watson can't help but chuckle as he flattens the first edition against the breakfast table. Winthrop Vault Scandal Rocks Society, screams the Daily Chronicle, the headline font so large it nearly obscures the sketch beneath, a fanciful rendering of the vault spewing ghosts and treasure, complete with a swooning lady in the corner for dramatic effect. Holmes doesn't glance up from his microscope. "Ah, the Fourth Estate," he murmurs, adjusting a slide with surgical precision, transforming nuance into pantomime since the invention of the printing press. Watson clears his throat and reads aloud from the Evening Standard. "Aristocratic secrets exposed, the key that unlocked a century of shame." Below it, an entirely fabricated quote attributed to Holmes himself. "I've never seen such depravity," declares the great detective. This earns a derisive snort. "If I commented on every depravity I've encountered, Watson, I'd require my own daily column and a stiff drink." The Illustrated Police News takes the prize for sheer creativity. Its front page dominated by a woodcut of Holmes wrestling a shadowy figure atop the vault, while a raven the size of a carriage hovers ominously overhead. The caption declares, "Detective foils occult heist." Watson's laughter dies, though, when he unfolds the Times. No theatrics here, just a cold, meticulous accounting of the Winthrop family's colonial holdings, paired with a dryly worded announcement from Parliament about reviewing certain historical trade records. The absence of exclamation points makes the truth land heavier. Holmes finally looks up, his eyes sharp. There, beneath the circus, the real damage begins. Ledgers don't bleed, Watson, but reputations. He flicks the Times with his finger. They hemorrhage quietly, and the stain spreads far beyond the crime. Outside, a newsboy's cry rises above the clatter of hooves. Read all about it, lords and lies. Holmes' lips twist into something too bitter to be a smile. How poetic. They'll sell the truth for a penny, wrap fish in it tomorrow, and call it justice. The firelight dances across Holmes' expectant face as he leans forward, steepling his fingers beneath his chin like a professor preparing to administer an oral examination. "Let us review your observations, Doctor," he begins, plucking a single black thread from the cuff of his own sleeve. A thread Watson hadn't noticed until this moment. "Begin with the simplest detail. What color were the butler's shoelaces when we first interviewed him?" Watson's teacup hovers halfway to his lips. Shoelaces. His mind scrambles backward through the haze of candle-lit interrogations and whispered confessions. "Brown, surely," he ventures. "Standard for household staff. Grey," Holmes corrects, producing from his pocket a lace the exact shade of weathered tombstone. Unfrayed at the tips from repeated knotting. Our dutiful butler hadn't purchased new laces in years, yet his shoes gleamed with fresh polish every morning. Why? Because he spent his nights walking London's roughest districts, scraping the leather raw against cobblestones while running errands for a master who paid him in secrets rather than wages. The lesson continues mercilessly. Holmes arranges 5 objects on the table between them: a crushed cigarillo, a button embossed with a 3-tailed lion, a handkerchief monogrammed E. W, a tram ticket from Whitecapel, and the mangled remains of a sardine tin. Connect them, he commands. Watson's pulse quickens. Each item feels familiar yet alien, like fragments from different puzzles. The cigarillo, Edwin's preferred brand, the button matching the assassin's tattoo, the sardine tin. The raven, Watson blurts, "You found fish scraps on the dockside assassin's boots." He must have been the one feeding it. Holmes' slow clap stings more than sarcasm ever could. Elementary, yet you miss the greater truth. These weren't separate clues. They were a timeline. His finger traces an invisible path from the cigarillo. Edwin's last smoke before his accident, to the tram ticket. The assassin's alibi, purchased by a man who reeked of bergamot and fish oil. The sardine tin's jagged edge catches the light. Not random damage, but deliberate scoring. Our killer marked his cans like a zookeeper feeding a prized specimen. The raven didn't just obey him, it recognized him. Watson's notebook lies open on his knee, its pages suddenly inadequate. Holmes softens, but only just. "You see, my friend, but you do not observe. A butler's laces tell us his habits. A monogram whispers its owner's arrogance. Even silence." He taps the sardine tin's mute metal, screams, "If you know how to listen." Outside, a carriage rattles past, its lanterns painting fleeting stripes across the ceiling. Watson stares at his own hands, calloused from surgery yet blind to the stories pressed into everyday objects. Holmes' final lesson lingers in the tobacco-scented air. Crimes are solved in the pauses between gunshots. Doctor, in the dust that settles when everyone else has stopped looking. The violin's mournful cry winds through the smoke-layered air of 221B Baker Street, each note trembling with the weight of unspoken reckonings. Holmes' bow moves not with its usual precision, but with something closer to surrender, the melody wavering between a requiem and a question. Outside, the gas lamps flicker like guttering candles, their glow barely piercing the fog that curls against the windowpanes London's own shroud, drawn tight over wounds that no verdict can suture. Watson's pen hesitates above the final page of his case notes, the ink pooling dark as the circles beneath his friend's eyes. The words won't come easily tonight. How does one summarize a ledger of suffering in tidy paragraphs? How to reduce stolen lives to a flourish of punctuation? His handwriting, usually so regimented, sprawls unevenly across the page, betraying the tension in his fingers. The Winthrop case concluded today. He begins, then scratches it out, too sterile, too final, Holmes playing shifts. A minor key now, the sort of music composed for empty churches and unanswered letters. His eyes remain closed, but the violin speaks what he cannot. The melody carries echoes of the dockside raven's cry, the creak of the vault door, the hollow clink of a counterfeit keys striking marble. Justice, it seems, wears many faces. Some demand the gallows. Others settle for truth laid bare in newsprint. But the deepest wounds, those fester in the silence between sentences, in the spaces where the law's ink runs dry. Watson tries again. The past is not a locked room, he writes, watching Holmes' shadow stretch long against the bookshelf, but a tide. It retreats only to return, dragging secrets from the deep when we least expect it. The doctor's gaze drifts to the mantel, where 3 items now rest like relics on an altar. The forged key, its teeth still gleaming with false promise. Lord Edwin's pendant, its lion's eyes dulled by time, and a single black feather, pristine despite the storm that birthed it. The final notes of the violin hang suspended, neither fading nor resolving. Holmes lowers the instrument at last, his voice barely louder than the embers collapsing in the hearth. "Do you suppose the ledgers will be enough, Watson? Will columns of numbers ever balance the scales?" The doctor sets down his pen. Outside, a carriage rattles past, its wheels churning up mud from the day's rain. London marching on, indifferent. Some debts, he realizes, aren't meant to be repaid. They're meant to be remembered. His fingers find the casebook once more, and this time the words come unbidden. No verdict today. Only reckoning, and the uneasy knowledge that some doors, once opened, can never truly be shut again. The fire pops, the clock ticks, and in the hush that follows, the feather on the mantel stirs, not from any draught, but as if something unseen has passed by, trailing fingers through the ashes of the past. The case of the Winthrop key, unraveled like a cursed tapestry, threads of greed, legacy, and atonement, pulling tighter with every revelation, until the whole design snapped into grotesque clarity. Holmes didn't merely solve a theft. He exposed a bloodline's rot festering beneath guilt and pedigree. Think of it, a vault that held no gold, only ghosts. Ledgers where human lives were tallied like livestock. A key that wasn't lost, but awakened, its teeth sharpened by generations of silence. The brilliance of Holmes' methods lay not in dramatic showdowns, but in how he traced the scent of bergamot to a maid's collar, how he weighed a counterfeit key and heard the hollow ring of desperation in its metal. But here's the rubber: justice in this case wore a mask of compromise. The Winthrop name won't hang from the gallows, only the court of public opinion. Reparations will be paid. Museums will whisper of scandal. Yet the butler who risked everything walks free while the aristocracy licks wounds that will heal over by next season. Holmes knew the truth. Some crimes are too vast for handcuffs. The law's blindfold slips when confronted with sins woven into the fabric of empire. So where does that leave us, the audience to this gilded tragedy? With a lingering question: what would you have done? Melted the key, burned the ledgers, or locked the vault and thrown away history's evidence once more? Holmes' genius was never about answers. It was about forcing the world to stare into the mirror of its own complicity. If these shadows of Victorian intrigue have left you hungering for more, consider this a standing invitation. The game never truly ends. It merely waits for fresh eyes to spot the next thread. Subscribe and together we'll unravel more of London's darkest puzzles, one gleaming clue at a time. After all, as Holmes himself would say, the world is full of locked doors. The thrill is in learning which keys still turn.